We now have the pleasure of being joined by the head coach of Duke men's lacrosse, returnee of the podcast, 4 years running now, head coach John Danowski. Coach, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure. It's my first one this year, so I'm excited to be with you guys.
First podcast, yeah, that's always a good thing. Um,
We don't get a lot of coverage here, so it's basketball season, as you know,
mhm.
and our men and women are still alive, and I'm not sure that anybody realizes that we have a lacrosse team here on campus. So,
And that's why we love covering lacrosse because the coaches are always willing to talk with us and are so accessible and awesome. So we really appreciate that. I just want to start with the season so far, 8-0 to start the year. The non-conference schedule, I think this season has been, I think what I would call a little weaker than maybe years previously. What do you decide? What goes into those decisions about maybe scheduling some non-power conference lacrosse teams and you still have Cornell coming up, obviously, but what goes into making the non-conference schedule?
one is budget. Um, so that's always and two, to be perfectly honest, a lot of people have dropped us over the last, for example, Richmond. Um, our date, Delaware came into their conference, and so Delaware, they gave up our date with them to play Delaware because it was mandated by their conference. A couple of years ago, Loyola dropped us. Georgetown has dropped us. Johns Hopkins dropped us. And, I get it. Johns Hopkins has these traditional games where they play, all the locals. They play Maryland, they play Navy, they play, Virginia, non-conference. Um, and so once you lose a game on your schedule, it's hard to get them back. Um, and so, I understand it. Listen, these guys are friends of mine. Some of them have to do it for all sorts of reasons. But scheduling is getting, tougher and tougher. Um, and budgets again being what they are, last year we had to pay Michigan $25,000 to come to Duke because they couldn't afford to come to Duke in February. And so every year you're kind of scrambling in February and March, to figure out who you can play, who's available, how much money you have to spend, over the course of the year. When we come to Syracuse, we like to charter because it's Syracuse charters when they come to us, because connecting commercial would be difficult, long and difficult. And so we raise money for that. It's stuff like that. So there's all these moving parts. This year, it's just the way it went. Next year we'll try to change it again. But it's a long-winded answer to, there's just a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, coach, you mentioned your hand a little bit forced there in the beginning. You played two Ivies in the first 5 games last year, no Ivies in the first five this year, but you're one of four undefeated teams in Division One. However, the RPI puts you at seventh this week. Does it concern you at all that the ACC slate might have a pretty big impact on your team seeding come tournament time?
Nah, listen, it's one game at a time. We're not even thinking about making the playoffs yet. We're in no position to have those discussions. We've got to, approach each game. It sounds very coach trite, but it is truly one game at a time. And you want to be 1-0 at the end of the week, and so that's the goal. After Syracuse comes Virginia. After Virginia comes Cornell. After Cornell comes Notre Dame. After Notre Dame comes Carolina. And there's a scenario we could lose all five and be home and not be in the playoffs. So, for us to even consider those things, right now it's March still, and it's just, it's one practice at a time, really. We want to get better today at practice.
I want to talk about that game against Denver last weekend. Toughest game for you guys this season so far. Denver, obviously a good team. Syracuse went down to the wire with them as well. You fall behind 4-0 after the first quarter, respond with a 7-0 run. What does it say about your squad that they responded so well to adversity, maybe when that had you hadn't faced adversity so far this season?
Yeah, I'm not sure. We'll certainly play that up. But it's only one game. Um, it was hot. The weather was like in the mid 80s, and it was hot for both teams. For sure. Um, they play a very unique style defensively. They really pack it in, rely on their goalie. Um, Offensively, they scored twice in transition. Um, in that first quarter, once an extra man and just once in the box. And so, we thought that if we could just keep the game in the box, that we would have a better chance to be successful. But I've never been in a game where we outshot, we took 50 shots. I think they took 30. We made two saves. Over the course, we scored 7 goals in one quarter and scored 1 goal in 3 quarters. If you had told me that we would have won that game, if is how it played out, I would have thought you were crazy. So, every game has got its own life. It's got its own story. That was certainly a unique one for sure.
Yeah, and last year you had the chance to play Syracuse twice. You beat them in the regular season on your home turf and then fell to them in the ACC title game on that neutral site. What did you learn when looking at this year's Syracuse team when much of it is returning?
Yeah, they're dynamite. Listen, they're great. They're great in every position, starting from the goalie on out. Defensively, they're older, big and strong, great at the faceoff X. Attack is dynamite. Tuarton, winner, Joey Spallina, in a runaway. I mean, we're just we're happy that this is going to be a great experience for us. But they blow people up at home, and it's going to be a great experience for our guys.
Both goalies excelled in last year's game, Jameson and McCool. Can you talk about how Jameson's been playing this year and what impresses you most about McCool?
Um, Patrick, up until Sunday, I don't think he saw the ball real well. Um, Early, and then again, he didn't see a lot of shots. He saw contested shots. He saw, shots from the perimeter. Again, he only made two saves, so that was probably his worst outing. But McCool is just one of those guys that he's a winner. He makes. First of all, the position is impossible to play, right? Everybody shoots it really hard. Every team has got guys who can bring it. And people coach their offenses. Everybody coaches their offenses, in different ways, but he wins. And there are times where there are goals that he gives up, and you say, "Wow, thought he could have had that," and then he makes a spectacular one. Great outlet passer and a leader. So if you give me John Galloway, former Syracuse great goalie, played for me on the World Team, 2018, and the reason that we chose John was because we knew the guys wanted to play in front of him, and that's such a big intangible that you just can't put your money on that his teammates want to play for him. That's what it appears anyway, without me having any knowledge.
And Coach Galloway came here with Vermont or with Vermont last year.
With Jacksonville.
Jacksonville last year, who you guys played earlier this season as well.
Mhm.
So nice homecoming for him.
Yeah. And Coach, you mentioned briefly about the Dome crowd and how they beat teams badly at home. Last time you were at the Dome was in 2024, just 4 goals scored in that game. And that was a Wednesday night game. There was still about 5,000 plus fans. Can you speak on how tough an environment like that is to play in?
It's not so much the environment in that Syracuse is really good. Like when I was at Hofstra, people would say, "Man, you don't want to play Hofstra at night, because they're really good at night." It's like discrediting who our teams were. Yes, the lights and the evening is what makes teams have a hard time. It's the fact that they're really good. and they're good. They're well coached and they're good at every position and they love, there's great, you can see Syracuse, when Coach Roy Simmons was there, one of the things I've always loved about Syracuse lacrosse is that the kids love playing there, and you can see it, and you can see the joy, and when they play in front of their home fans, just like when our guys play here at Koskinen, the guys love playing in Koskinen. They love, this past weekend, we had a great crowd with people were kind of coming in for the women's basketball game, which was at 4 o'clock, and it was a really cool environment. It just says a lot for their program, their tradition, but who they are as a team.
You lose your top two scorers, Andrew McAdory, Eric Molliver. What's been impressive about the guys that have stepped up with you still have scored 20 goals 4 times this season?
Well, I think the interesting thing for us is this is 2 years in a row that we have three attackmen who have never played at Duke before, played attack. This year it's two freshmen and a junior. We've moved Ben Johnston down to attack. Last year was Eric Malver and Andrew McAdory, moved him to attack, and Andrew wasn't an attackman, you know, and um, and then Luke Graham, and then Luke Graham got hurt, and he was a fifth-year transfer. So, we've had to try to generate goals in different ways. Off the face-off game, in transition, obviously extra man. We've only played extra man once in the last 2 games, 6-on-6 in the box. But we're trying to play a little faster, trying to ride a little bit, and trying to create some turnovers and create more possessions and less possessions, obviously, on defense. Because the attack we knew was going to be so young and so inexperienced.
Yeah, and Aiden McGuire, obviously one of the best defensive players in the country, last year's ACC co-defensive player of the year. How impressive is it for a shorty to get that award, and what do you make of him leading such a successful unit?
It's rare, for sure. And most young men who come to college, they have no interest in playing short stick team midfield. They all want to be offensive middies. But Aiden's personality and his skill set is more suited, to be a defender. And it is like having an extra pole, on the field. Um, that he is, like all offenses are going to attack the short sticks. But I think, and Aiden has been a great leader this year for us. The guys voted him captain, and he's really done a great job in terms of leadership. And because the other guys that are going to play are going to be 2 sophomores with him and 2 freshmen. So again, very young, at that position.
You pulled Kyle Colsey away from Virginia and away from his brother, his father, obviously a legendary player here for Syracuse. What does it speak about him having such a successful season coming off a year where he didn't play due to injury?
He's one of those guys that, when you haven't played, and he didn't play in the fall at all either. We were very conservative, with his rehab. And since we have really good medicine here, great sports medicine department, we decided, hey, listen, let's not. So he didn't go live at all. So he didn't play lacrosse for 2 years.
Wow.
And that's a long time, and it's you go from being a high school star and having the ball in your stick all the time to trying to learn a system where you're part of a whole. And that's not easy, and playing attack in college is not easy. So, he's had the growing pains, for sure. And there's some games where, he's got his skills are obvious, and some where it's, he's got, yeah, growing pains. He's got to learn those things under fire. But he's been a delight to work with. He's very, very coachable, and he's healthy.
Well, thank you so much, Coach. We really appreciate you taking the time as always. Look forward to having you back on the Ostrom Avenue podcast next year, and good luck against Syracuse.
Well, I'll tell you what, man, you guys do a great job. I know I'm going to be watching you or listening to you on ESPN, in the future. I know that, your major, will take you to those places, at Syracuse. So with all your other fellow alumni who are, on the airwaves.
Thanks,
Thank
Coach.
you.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.